and is not only here once every 10 years, but is here almost on a weekly basis, helping us tell the story the way it should be told. So thank you so much, Neil, for playing that role. And it gets a space shuttle program that wrote books, that raised families and did amazing things in their community for decades upon decades upon decades. So I'm so glad we're here to celebrate the amazing story that we're honoring tonight, 50th anniversary of Skylab, and to remember that these human beings have been incredible for the better part of a century. So with that, I thank you again for being members. I thank you for being here. And Jeff, if you wouldn't mind coming up and starting us off, that'd be great.
My name is Jeff Nunn. I'm the space curator here at the Museum of Flight, and I just want to put it out there how incredible it is to have our special guests here this evening. This Sunday, Mother's Day, is the 50th anniversary of the launch of the United States' first space station, Skylab. And we've got a couple of models over here showing the vehicles that made that happen. And we are so honored and amazed to have 3 guests here this evening who were directly involved, who flew on the rockets, who helped to run the space station, and who guided them from mission control. So without further ado, I would like to invite our guests up here. So Jack, Ed, and Neil, if you could please join me up here on stage. All right, and we each have our own microphone so we can sing our quartet.
That's it. Are these chairs wired with electricity? 15 volts or something? 1,000 volts?
All right, excellent.
11, 12.
12.
New technology. Switch yours falling off your chair.
Trying to keep my is Ed Gibson, who was the scientist pilot on Skylab 4. And Ed, would you like to talk a little bit about the numbering of the Skylab missions, because they can be a little wonky for those not quite accustomed to them?
Sure, it's very straightforward. The system that they came up with first, was engineers, as they would be very logical. They numbered the 4 flights, which was the first one launched the space station. So we had Skylab 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then the public relations guys came along and said, hey, people are not really interested in that first flight. We're only interested in the cruise flight. So that became just, its numbers were switched to 1, 2, 3. And then people said, well, are those Roman numerals or Arabic? And so to this day, I don't know what flight I flew on.
All right, thank you so much. And sitting in the middle there, we have Neil Hutchison, who I have also experienced getting rather stern phone calls from asking me to do things. As a member of the Museum Spaceflight Committee, I want to thank Neil for orchestrating this evening tonight. It's really thanks to him and his work and his relationship with Ed and Jack, being able to bring everyone here tonight to make sure that we are able to have this incredible panel for you. So Neil, thank you so much. And Neil is kind of the boss up here because he was a flight director during Skylab, and we've had a lot of conversations about how things shifted from Apollo. You may have, if any of you were here for the Apollo 17 anniversary, we talked a little bit about how the flight control room ran during Apollo and how things changed up a little bit during Skylab, moving from moon missions to operating long-term in space, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little later. So, and then on the far end there is Jack Lausma, who was the pilot on Skylab 3, and Jack is known for being active in Marine recruiting while in space. He was one of the original live streamers. I've heard tales of his broadcasts from space and weightlifting in weightlessness.
Simplify.
Simplify.
Excellent. All right, so I noticed one of the things that's really exciting is how many young people I see in the audience here, and so we're gonna definitely try to cover the history of this in a way that folks who might not have been alive at the time can recognize.
For me, everybody's young here.
So with that, I'd like to first pose the question, if someone would like to summarize how Skylab came to be and what the significance of the Skylab program was coming out of Apollo.
Yeah, I can say a few words about that. I think Neil's got some more information about it, but we often don't think about the fact that the Skylab was in the interim from the manned capsule programs to the space station that we see today. In fact, at the time, our longest flight in space had been on the Gemini capsule for 15 days, two guys eating, sleeping, wasting with the expanse of the front seat of a Volkswagen Beetle for 15 days.
We canceled all the flights, as Neil has said, after Apollo 17. People said, well, we got this hardware left over, what can we do with it? Well, a lot of people had some good ideas. Fortunately, there was the people at Marshall Space Flight Center came along, led by Vernon Brown, and said, well, let's use some of that hardware we got left over, and then we can take the upper stage of a Saturn V, that was S4B, and make that into a space station. So they came up with the idea, well, why don't we just, once we just send it up there, and then guys can go up there and clean out and build something inside. Well, that sounded good from initially, but then it got to be too expensive. So finally, I said, let's just outfit it on the ground. So we did it that way, and that worked well. So we ended up with being up there, as I said, 84 days, but we had a little bit of a problem in that, I mentioned we didn't have enough food. We were up there, we had enough food for 56 days. Well, so what do? Well, enter the small food bar. This was something, we had a medical experiment where they measured the amount of minerals, 6 different minerals, and when it came into our body and what came out, did a mineral balance on us. So how do we work that if we just use food bars? So they carefully made all the food bars with the right nutrients, and so that worked real well. The only trouble was that the food bar was not that tasty, although it was pretty good. The food they really gave us, I had to say, the station was really good. So we had some empty calories. That is, things which no nutrients in it, but were called empty calories. And that was, there were some interesting things here. We had one that we all liked on our flight. It's called the butter cookie. Now, the butter cookie became really desirable, and after a while it became the Skylab monetary unit. It was really ingenious on how they kept us up there, and it worked real well. I just can't say enough about the people that worked around the clock to get that done.
Well, and speaking of butter cookies, it's my understanding that towards the end of your mission, you were spending a lot of time observing the sun, and I've heard a story that your commander at one point was telling you to go to sleep, and you wanted to stay up a little bit longer, and you offered you offered him a bribe, and in order to be able to stay up, because you were confident that there was going to be a solar flare any minute. Can you talk a little bit about
Well,
about that?
I don't quite remember the details on that. I mean, this is 50 years ago.
Right.
I mean, sometimes people ask me when I am if to pull up my driver's license. What happened there? I think what happened was that I was trying to convince Jerry that I should certainly stay up and get that job done. And so the Skylab monitor unit came into use, and
Yeah, it's my understanding you managed to, staying up was good. You managed to actually capture a solar flare on the telescope mount. But at least according to what I was reading, butter cookies in this case was code for the real bribe, which was post mission.
well, that too, yeah.
I believe it's a bottle of scotch or
Yeah,
yeah.
a few lines like that, yeah.
So you mentioned that Skylab was built from the upper stage of a Saturn V rocket, and it was a tremendous habitable volume. And by comparison, the International Space Station has more room overall, but the diameter, I think, of each module is about 15 feet, and I think Skylab was about 22 feet interior across. What was it like first entering into the station when you first got up there?
Well, we found out that in order to get the hydrogen tank, was what we were living in, was 22 feet diameter, probably about 35 or 40 feet long. And at the base of it, it had our living quarters, and above that, above our ceiling, with of course the floor and the ceiling were all open, so air could go through. It must have been about over 20 feet to move around in. And the oxygen tank was down below, but it was evacuated, and that's where we dumped our junk through a inlet. But we thought it was going to be difficult to maneuver from the upper opening down to the living quarters, because it's about 30 feet or something like that. So we invented a fireman's pole, and the fireman's pole connected the top with the tank with the ceiling of our living quarters. And the first thing that we noticed when we got in there is we didn't need that darn pole. It was really in the way. So we broke it all up in its 6 or 8 pieces and set it somewhere for the rest of the mission. We just found we could float from the top, get where we wanted to go, and land the way we wanted to land just naturally. So in terms of mobility around the station, we didn't need that kind of a pole. But of course, you had to have foot restraints in some places and handholds in other places, and so those were all prearranged through a lot of the underwater work that we did at Warner von Braun's tank. So we got real well acquainted with how to move and so forth. We also had, on the inside of that circle, we had a lot of the stuff stowed in lockers, and all of our water was in tanks around the periphery. And sometimes we'd go up and get something out of the locker, and you didn't think about it, but all of a sudden you're too far away and you can't decide. And then have somebody come along and give us a push.
Did anyone ever get stuck out in the middle of the volume?
Not forever.
We tried to get the scientists stuck out in there.
Well, they're smart. They can figure out how to get
One
back.
scientist on each mission, I might say. Ed was on the third mission, but Owen Garriott was our scientist, and he was a professor of electronics from Stanford University, I believe it was. And Ed is a bona fide solar physicist. And on the first mission, our scientist was a medical doctor, Joe Kerbel, who's still living but not here today. The rest of us were just dumb pilots.
So we talk a little bit about what was needed in order to make sure that Skylab was successful. Neil, do you want to talk a little bit about the Skylab rescue?
Well, it's really not particularly well known, certainly not as well known as Apollo 13 was, but as a guy who operated in both of those flights, I can tell you that we absolutely beat the machine in Skylab 1. The vehicle, we've described the vehicle here, was of course launched unmanned. And unfortunately, when you get in orbit, you're exposed to extreme heat for a while and then very cold and a lot of heat. You need to have a lot of electricity in a place like that because we had a lot of equipment inside that needed to be powered and a lot of experiments. And as the vehicle was launching, it had a thermal and micrometeoroid covering all around the habitable part of the vehicle and of the Skylab station itself. And we, NASA, failed to properly vent, basically drill holes in it, so when it went from one atmosphere to a vacuum, the air would have between it and the actual module would have a way to escape. And unfortunately, that caused that shield to come undone. It basically ripped along the entire side of the vehicle. And in the process of doing that, it tore off about a fourth of our power capability. We lost one entire side of the Skylab power system, never made it to orbit. And the other side made it, but it was jammed down onto the side of the spacecraft by junk that came loose when the micrometeoroid shield failed during ascent. And the result of all that, I'm not going to remember the exact timing, but we were going to launch the next crew, the Skylab 2 crew, John Red Kerwin and PJ White, in about 2 days. And we couldn't because the lab was up there, but it was basically in a really poor shape. We began to understand just how important that micrometeoroid shield was. Actually, it was more important for the thermal properties than it was for keeping penetrations from going into the cabin. And it got hotter and hotter and hotter inside the vehicle where the crews were going to be. And so we stopped the countdown for the first crew, and in 10 days concocted a thing we call the parasol, which Jack's going to talk about something different sooner or later here, but we literally reinvented the wheel about how to cool that vehicle with a device that the crew was going to install when they got up there. And of course, I was fortunate enough to be the flight director on duty when we opened the door. When the first crew finally got up there, it was not very pleasant. The ground had done a lot of things to try and purge the atmosphere because and we couldn't keep it cool. It was 130 degrees inside Skylab when we opened the door. And we eventually were able to get a device called the parasol, which this man then had a better mousetrap that he can talk about called what we call the parasail, I believe is what it was called.
I'll think of it in a minute.
Well, he did it. He did the EVA to put it up. I know. I was involved in that one too. And, we did eventually get this umbrella device stuck out through one of the science ports that we were going to use to expose experiments to the vacuum, called a NOAA. And it covered part of the vehicle, and the ground got enough of the air recirculated in there before they got there that they were able to get in. And it was mighty warm those first couple of days. In fact, the crew couldn't sleep in there. They went back to they might have slept in the docking adapter, but I think they went back to the command module until we could get the temperatures under control. But it was 10 days of absolutely amazing work.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can't say enough for the first crew that went up and did the repair work. Because as Neil mentioned, when the solar panel was ripped off, one of them got ripped off because of when we stopped, the thing was partially void and it just kept on going. The solar panel micro shield was supposed to stand about this far off the surface, but it was held down there by these clamps. But going through about Mach 1 on the liftoff, some air slipped underneath the solar panel, and that, or the micrometeorite shield, has such a large area that there was tremendous force, and it just ripped off it came up into the airstream, and then that got ripped off. So, we first of all had lost our thermal control, and then we lost one of the solar panels completely, and the other one was held down by one of the straps. So there we were, ready to go into space, and we had something that was overheated and underpowered. We tried to convince that the first crew that it was not too bad. It's only 135 degrees in there, but it was a dry heat, just like that.
It wasn't Texas.
Yeah, I know, but anyways, we tried to reassure them, but they didn't seem reassured. But anyways, they went up there, Pete Conrad and his crew really did a great job. We worked on a lot of it on the ground in water tanks, trying to perfect all those procedures, and they did quite well. I'm really amazed that it came off as well as it did. And so they saved the Skylab space station, and saved the program and allowed the other two crews to fly, Jack and myself and our crew. So we owe them a great debt of gratitude for what they did.
Well, and all three of your missions happened in the same year, so you were already on crews assigned. So what roles did you have in, once that the emergency was known? Were you involved in the problem solving, and how, and if so, how?
I was, because that was I was on the third crew, and this was the first crew, so I couldn't get close to the simulators. They didn't even let me walk by them. So I couldn't really be trained for that. So Rusty Schweigert, myself, and Dory Musgrave, we got to work in water tank and came up with some of the EVA solutions to get the job done. And that's when we really invented how EVA could be done and very in a very constructive way. If any of you
Also
ever get a
checked
chance,
out all the tools.
Yeah.
Because we took up some incredible equipment, the bolt cutter thing on the end of a pole, trying to cut that strap.
oh yeah, yeah, they came up with bolt cutters, which was on the end of the strap, and they got that partially done. But what they tried to do is one of the solar panels that was left was held down, and it's